As you know, we are walking a road with Jesus. We're on a journey with Jesus from the time he started his ministry to the cross. And I found this very inspiring, very encouraging, just walking alongside Jesus, listening to his words. As I said, we're not focusing on what he does, but what he's been saying. Now, I can't cover every word that he said. I mean, Jesus just said some incredible things. But what I'm hoping to do is get us to Easter, having walked from his ministry with him, the start of his ministry, to the cross, and highlighting some of the things he said. Last Sunday, we studied the Sermon on the Mount, but part of it, the Beatitudes. And Jesus clearly defined a new constitution for the citizens of his kingdom. Who found that helpful? Yes, I thought it was very inspiring to get a different slant on what the Lord is saying. And that all happened because we examined that word blessed. If you weren't here, I encourage you to go online. You can listen to us. You can download it from iTunes. I mean, it's available, podcast, whatever you like. You can stream it. It's all available to you. So you can go online, watch it or listen to it. But I do encourage you. It really helped a lot of people. I'd like to continue the journey, and we're about 2 years into the Lord's ministry now. And he's starting to talk a lot about his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. You know, it started with the Beatitudes on the Sermon on the Mount, because the first citizens of his kingdom were the people that he'd just chosen. So he takes them up and he sort of gives them his manifesto, and now we find him talking a lot about his kingdom. We find it in Matthew 13, 18, 20, 22, 25, Mark 4, and Luke 13, and it's always centered around parables, because the only way he could get people to see or to perceive is to connect with them through parables, and most of them were farming illustrations, because their livelihood, whether they were actually farmers or not, their livelihood depended on the produce that was being produced by them or their community. So it was easy for them to relate to things when he spoke in parables. But when he spoke in parables, there were two dimensions to the parable. The parable always spoke to the disciples about the inner life, and because he wanted them to grasp that, because knowing that they were going to be his representative, they were going to be the church when he left. But also, he spoke to the multitudes. And when he spoke to the multitudes, he spoke to them so that they could apply it in their lives. And he always said, if you have ears, then hear this, or most assuredly I say to you. In other words, listen, this is important. What I'd like us to look at today is just one parable, which is a very short parable. It's 2 verses, and it's found in Matthew 13, verses 31 and 32. It's the parable of the mustard seed. They say, well, Pastor Chris, I mean, there are, just before this is the parable of the sower, which is far more defined, and there's a lot more meat to that than this little parable. But I want to just explain something about this parable that is very important if we are going to perceive, because this is kingdom perspectives. If we're going to perceive the kingdom, we need to understand certain things. This is a very important one, because it's the law of small beginnings. And if you don't accept that truth, if you're not comfortable with small beginnings, you can't ever be part of the kingdom. So let's read it. It says this. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. But when it's grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Wow. What is a mustard seed? Have any of you ever seen a grain of mustard? It's tiny. It really is. I mean, you could get hundreds of them. If you dipped into a sack, you get hundreds of them in your palm. And during that time in Middle Eastern culture, the mustard seed was very popular because it flavored things. Now, I did a little bit of study about this because there are two views here. The one is that the tree, the mustard tree, is not really a tree. And therefore, there must be some kind of perversion in this illustration, because the mustard seed that grows always grows into a bush. And you can, if you go to, if you see them farmed, these are incredibly beautiful bushes, and you can eat the leaves. It's one of these things that nothing is wasted. But so if you saw a field of mustard plant, it would just look like a whole lot of these lovely yellow bushes, and they'd just go on for miles and miles. Interesting thing about the mustard bush is that, A, you can eat everything, but also it produces seed within 30 to 60 days. So that it's very quick. And this is why when we examine it in the context of faith, we'll see that, because it says that our faith should be like mustard seed, we see that it's not one piece of faith. It's faith that produces, and it produces other things. But in this illustration, there are two thoughts here. The one thought is that this mustard seed, which is the smallest, represents the kingdom because it represents the early church, the birth of the church, which started with very small beginnings. If we look at the life of Jesus, when God became man, and he walked this planet, he walked this earth, he wasn't introduced in some grand way. And that's the same principle. He almost came undercover. It was nothing. Even his ministry took 30 years. He was 30 before he actually came out. And even when he started his ministry, he tried to cover things until the religious people forced him out. And what this parable is saying, that the church grew from very small beginnings. This seed represents the early church. It's what we are part of.
We hope you enjoyed this program. To view the rest of the episode, visit cornerstonethechurch.com and click on Life Matters TV.